G'day, welcome back. This is the next video in my series on chess statistics, which is where I go into the sort of data behind chess and what conclusions we can draw. Now, in my previous video in this series, we looked at the amount of opening prep, which was typical in World Chess Championship matches, and we sort of saw ebbs and flows there, right? At the start, general levels of prep were quite low, and then it really reached fever pitch in the 2000s and seems to have eased off a little bit as people are using mainly engines to find variations, a few moves earlier in some of the well played and well sort of researched opening lines. Now, since I've got all this sort of chess opening data at my fingertips, I decided I'd slice and dice it a little bit more and have a look at something else which I've always been curious about. There are some classic names in terms of opening theory, whether it's the oldies, the old goldies, your Roy Lopez's and so on, or particularly the sort of the mythical names from, the early 20th century. You're thinking of Tarrasch, Nimzo, Alekhine, Rubinstein, Reti, Keres, so on. A little bit later on, obviously Keres, then Botvinnik, then Steinitz, Rubinstein, and so on. Really famous names. And I just thought it'd be interesting to have a look at, who really has contributed the most and who could you regard as being the sort of the real legends of opening theory. Now, my end game here is that sort of little round table I've got there. You can't see it very clearly on the thumbnail, which is kind of a ranking of who's contributed the most to opening chess theory, to the extent that you can compare different great players from different playing eras. So what I'm going to do is I'll just quickly run you through the analysis approach. So we'll go to my favorite capture screen now. So just run through what I've done here. First of all, you can see this file I've opened here is a sort of an ECO listing, and for instance, you can see it's got all the openings to certain degrees. If you understand the way the ECO works, it's got sort of the opening name, and then within the name there might be, you can see here, like a grob, double grob, or it might be a gambit, and then there'll be a variation, and then there'll be system. So there's just kind of different ways of classifying it. And so I've got the list here of all the ECO openings, and you see the key here is a lot of these will be triggered off the person's name, right? So Nimzo Larsen attack, classical variation. Now, just to give you a sense of what I've done here, Nimzo, I've shortened his name in my file to Nimzo so I can pick this up. So he'll get credit for all the games which open with B3, and so will Larsen, actually. So they both get credit for that. If Nimzo or Larsen name turns up later on within the same thing, they don't get credit for it. But then within Nimzo Larsen, Pac-Man, he'll get credit for all the lines, all the games which start with B3, but also go B3, E5, B2, Knight C6, F4. Whereas Nimzo Larsen, those two guys will get credit for all the games which start with B3 alone. So you can see that Bird gets credit for everything started at F4, and then some other players will get partial credit. So I actually measure it two ways. One is the number of sort of lines you sort of, are credited with. And the other one is also then how many games actually are played in that line. So that's the ECO database, which I've started off with, just the sort of the classification of the openings. And the next file here is the count. So what I did here is I've used my favorite piece of software, Scoutfish, this week's favorite anyway. And basically it's gone through the list of all the openings. It's played out the moves. Like, let's say we're looking for the Zukertort Ware defense. That's knight f3, a5, a little bit weird to me. So I've gone through Caserbase, 5 million games or so, and I've done the Scoutfish search for knight f3, a5. And so that reckons there's 9 games. There are some more reasonable things. King's Indian Attack, which 22,000 games in that line. So there's no player's name there. So no player will be credited with that. But you can see that this was, the Russians were really looking into not just the King's Indian itself, but the King's Indian Attack. So you got Smyslov and Spassky both get recognized for certain lines in that opening. That was the second step, to sort of go through the ECO lines, play out each ECO line, see how many games were played in the database. So having done that analysis, I then matched that off against my list of player names and then found out, how much opening research we can give them credit for. Now, that's not stored here. This is just a list of names, but I thought, which I've used for screening things. It started off as the top 100 players in chess metrics, so that was good. And then for this, obviously for opening lines, I've had to add on a lot of other guys, right? Wade, Verisov, Mora, O'Kelly, Rossolimo. These are all familiar. They're not top 100 chess players through time, but they are definitely well known for their openings. Veshnikovs, Can, Richter, Rouser, Sozin. I mean, all these famous names. Paulson, actually, very surprisingly, very early on. A lot of well-known lines in the French Sicilian. He's a lot more well-known, or should be well-known as a theoretician than he is. Winner, obviously, for Philidor, Petrov, Lolly, Mies, Evans, Greco, Max Lange, Palerio, Pilnik, Zaitsev. It's just a Breyer, just a list of who's who in terms of this Grunfeld, who actually did all the sort of early research in a lot of these lines. So a lot of really interesting names there, to be honest. What I've had to do then is I've run through this file and matched it off with the other file where I counted how many of the lines they had credit for and how many games were played in each of those lines. Now, this is good. So from that, if we've got it all run, we can come up with some pretty interesting charts. Let me just run this one first. Let me move that a little bit. So what this has ranked variations by the number of games which were played in each of those variations, and then match that against the player's name if that was the case. So this is just finding what are the biggest variations out there. Now this sort of strikes me, it's giving a few of the problems with the way I've chosen to do the analysis. For instance, if you look at the most played line, Zukertort opening knight f3, right? Does he really deserve credit for all the the size of the blob is the number of games. Zukertort may have played it first, but then you've had people like Reti and so on developing it further. And then knight f3, I mean, it could well be a Sicilian or an English or a Queen's Pawn game, not just knight f3 and a double fianchetto or whatever, right? So there are many openings which are within knight f3, one by transposition, so on. But anyway, it's interesting to see Zukertort up there with the most played opening. And you can see I've just ranked this by the first variation, which gets in that line. Roy Lopez is number 2. I mean, obviously he's 1530. He's not there, but he's way up the chart, so I put him back there. Roy Lopez, obviously, you know, it's beyond famous. His opening, and then you've got Morphy. Arguably, Morphy didn't actually play it first, but he's got recognition for the A6 line, so that's no surprises there. And then you've got Indian defenses, and then Nimzo Indian defenses, which Nimzo and Rubinstein are getting some credit for there. Zukertort in a Queen's Pawn game. I don't know which one. I have to look it up. And then now you see some good stuff here. So you have the French, excellent. Paulson, Winnower, Byrne, Tarrasch. Yeah, okay, they're all famous names. The Piet's defense, just him. That's good. So that's quite a sort of a late innovation. And then we've got the Karakan. Now this is where Botvinnik, this is how in all this analysis, for whatever reason, he's not a Panov Botvinnik, which is what I've grown up knowing what it is. But anyway, Panov gets credit for that. Sicilian defense, all the lines you expect. Alapin, Lasker. I don't think that's the Lasker Pelican, but it could be Taimanov, Rossolimo, Rouser, Richter Rouser. I mean, Richter and Rouser both have a dot the same size. Bogo Indian, Golubov, Alekhine, course, and then some of Scandinavian defense not so popular now, but still a lot of games through time in that. Ready opening, Benko, yep, cool. Nimzo Larsen, they both get credit for that. And then you can see, he's Petrov. He's one of the sort of very early ones, and he's Petrov defense. And then Nimzo has a line in Queen's in defense, which is where, you know, some players like Nimzo, he's sort of got credit for different lines. So that was very interesting. It's sort of showing the most played lines which have a person's name associated with them. The year that was sort of first sort of developed and played, and how many, the size of the blob is how many played in that line. So I found that quite a first sort of interesting way of looking at it. And then continue. So as I said, what we've done, there's two very similar charts here, but just bring this one into focus. So this is just counting the number of lines. This is not the number of games played anymore, just the number of lines each of those players have been affiliated or associated with, and it is giving you a very good summary of who is what. You can see Alekhine actually wins on this score. Nimzo comes number 2. You got Steinitz, Paulson. As I said, Paulson very surprisingly higher up he ranks in terms of the number of lines he's sort of credited with developing. Tarrasch, Rubinstein, Keres, Tarrasch, and then you can see in this area here you've got Bogolubov and Grunfeld. I think it's overriding Botvinnik's, Mislav, Marshall, Maroxy, Sugar and Alekhine. I mean, all of great names. Breyer, mainly Roy Lopez, Smyslov, Bronstein. And then, there was actually some interesting things here. What struck me is, first of all, the modern players are a bit left out because, they don't have as much chance to develop lines. You look at it, Rubinstein seems to be a very well-known player for opening theory. Modern players, Kasparov, Kramnik, Morrow, Chigorin. So, but what struck me is, like, for instance, here's Spassky, right? Now he's really high up, and he's got lines in the Caracan, the Tarrasch, the Marshall, the Grunfeld, the Catalan, the Queen's Indian, and King's Indian attack. So he's part of this, post-World War II Soviet sort of explosion where Botvinnik first, I imagine, Smyslov, Bronstein, Spassky, Korchnoi, Haverbach's in there, Taimanov's in there, all developing lines in more detail. Real explosion of chess opening theory at that time. So obviously they're quite important. And then I've got a similar chart here, which what I've done here is I've filtered out the lines. Remember, Alekhine was the top. I think it's the major one change. Alekhine's been moved down. I've filtered out, Alekhine, he was 30 something, now he's down to 26. So maybe he's lost 5 to 10 games, 10 lines, which weren't played more than 10 times. I can't remember exactly what filter I used on that. And there you can see. But anyway, same sort of Nimzo, Alekhine, Steinitz, Keres Botvinnik, Smyslov, Bronstein, and Larsen. You can see Larsen a bit more clearly here because obviously he's been, in terms of the sort of the more recent, in inverted commas, players, he's got a lot of credit for being opening theorist. And Kasparov, Kramnik. With all this, I point out Kramnik doesn't seem to get any credit in the Berlin, which is what people most know him for. So he's obviously done quite steady research in lots of other fields as well. I mean, I think he done a lot in the Catalan, and also I think the bayonet attack in the King's Indian were sort of partly due to him. So that gives you a broad slew of when they were born and who was important. And I'm just going to close it out here with my sort of summary of that, or assessment of that, in a sort of systematic way. People have personal sort of opinions on, this is something might be a little bit more important or less important or so on, but this gives you a general flavor of it. I mean, I've sort of structured it as a Knights of the Round Table type of a structure, or maybe a Levels of Hell in Dante's Inferno. So people in the same ring are supposed to be on the same level. Now, what I've done is I put Roy, Lopez, Philidor, and Greco in the middle. Everybody knows about their sort of Roy Lopez. He's opening Greco, a lot of the Greco-Molla Italian game type of analysis. And Philidor, they're from a lot longer ago. It's difficult to compare them with other more recent sort of chess opening analysis, but obviously they're super famous, so I'll put them under by themselves. And then we sort of move out to the next one, which I think from my charts kind of shows that the most important contributors: Steinitz, Tarrasch, Nimzo, Alekhine, Rubinstein, Keres, and Botvinnik. And then you go out one more level. Some of these guys one more level out, probably they could be ranked higher. For instance, Tarrasch, but anyway, Lasker, Reti, Tarrasch, Pogolyubov, Smyslov, Bronstein, Larsen, Kasparov, Kramnik, and I threw Paulson in there. He's probably the only name I wasn't really thinking would be in there, but he seems to have done a lot of opening research very early on, so seems to deserve his spot. There might be some players you think should be in this ranking, but it's sort of a nice summary. And if you think about growing up learning the chess openings, whether it's lines of the Roy Lopez or the Queen's Gambit or the Sicilian or the French or some of the the Indian openings, sort of the hypermodern stuff, these are the people's names that you are going to know. And obviously, a lot of the other players are the famous ones from sort of the Soviet era. I've got Botvinnik, Keres, Bronstein, Smyslov in there. I mean, we could have thrown in Spassky or anyway. That's not really much about chess, but I thought that was quite interesting. I've got the analysis and I got the data. I thought I'd sort of just share my thoughts on who seem to show up as the best players in chess opening theory. Thank you very much for watching.